Bett is the global meeting place for the education community. A trusted brand with more than 30 years of heritage, the Bett Series promotes the discovery of knowledge and technology to enhance lifelong learning.
This episode of the Edtech podcast is sponsored by FormAssembly, a leading web form builder and data collection platform for colleges and universities. With its drag-and-drop interface, robust integrations, and high standards of security and compliance, FormAssembly helps hundreds of customers in the higher education industry streamline data collection processes for students, staff, and alumni. For more information about FormAssembly, visit formassembly.com/edtech.
So it's about really bringing it into the spotlight now and saying, you know, we're here, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to be believed, we want to be acknowledged, and we want to be included in society, in every aspect of society. So there's no more ignoring us anymore.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Edtech podcast. This time we are back with our last What Matters in Edtech Series episode for 2020. So huge thank you for following and listening in. This week we are looking at SEND and Neurodiversity, specifically some personal stories and frustrations.
Being a parent of a child who is currently trying to navigate a system in lockdown is incredibly hard.
Some hopes for change across policy, technology and education.
It's actually, you know, reasonable adjustment is a legal requirement it's in the law. You know, organizations, including education, that has to meet this legal requirement around accessibility and inclusion. Yet I think for a lot of people, it's still just this idea of, well, no, actually, I don't really have to do that.
And some resources and tools for all of you listeners to help increase accessibility.
We've got all these lovely tools. We've got all these students. But how do we engage them and how do we personalise it? And one thing that I think has been really lacking is the feedback that teachers give students. And that is extremely important when it comes to those students with SEND, that they are getting that personalised experience still when they're not in the classroom.
If you love this episode and want a go-to list of EdTech for SEND and neurodiversity needs, I also recommend that you listen back to our episode 170 from the last series, which works well alongside this one. Okay, here we go. So, it's Friday. I am very pleased to have Nicole Ponsford and Liz Wright here with me today, and we're chatting SEND and Neurodiversity. For those who don't know Nick is the CEO and co-founder of the GEC, which is a platform, charter and community for change. And she's also the Southwest Regional Lead for the EdTech Demonstrator Programme. Nick is also a doctorate researcher and a Harvard co-author of Techno Teaching, as well as being a proud member of the EdTech 50. And as for Liz Wright is a Paralympic swimmer, originally from Australia and now resident here in the UK. She won bronze at the 1996 Summer Paralympics and a bronze and silver at the 2000 Summer Paralympics. Liz is also the editor of Disability Review magazine and has a Master of Philosophy in Fine Arts. So welcome both.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi.
So thank you very much for bearing with me. We've had a few technical challenges this morning, but I'm really excited. We've got 32 minutes to pack full of really fantastic content for our listeners. And I know that, you know, there's going to be a lot of personal stories here. So I guess first question, how did you two get to know one another?
Oh, wow. Through the medium of Twitter, I think.
And Nick, didn't you say that you'd been basically stalking me for a while and then you were like, Liz, come and join GEC?
I had a bit of a cyber crush on Liz and I'd kind of seen her work. And at the time, so obviously sort of doing stuff with the GEC, the Global Equality Collective, we're sort of looking at all the different characteristics and how we can help leaders in business and in education. And sort of looking around disability and anti-ableism is something that really interests me. It's kind of, I think actually in COVID, it's moving from being a kind of a bolt-on subject matter, but for personal reasons, it's always been of huge interest and a real passion is sort of inclusion in the classroom. And so when I seen what Liz was doing, and she is so super cool as well, I've sort of been stalking her, and then I pounced, I think, didn't I? I pounced and tried to do a charm offensive on you.
It worked. Hey, it totally worked. So.
I'm grinning from ear to ear. Moving on from that, I've got here, what is your personal connection to the subject of SEND and neurodiversity? So, who'd like to go first on that one?
Well, I mean, for me, it's very visible. I have a very visible disability. So, you just have to really, if any of the listeners look up a photo of me, it'd be like, that's the connection. I was born with what the doctors called congenital limb deficiency, but what I prefer to call limb difference, which is a more neutral term. Then kind of, deficiency means that I'm missing something, but I certainly don't feel like I'm missing something. So I prefer to call myself or identify as limb different. So that's, my connection, having grown up my whole life with missing half my right arm and half my right leg and having to wear a prosthetic and everything like that. I've been through every layer or every area of society where disability discrimination can happen, including education, and including tech, and dealing with those issues as they've kind of popped up and stuff like that. So that's, my very obvious connection to the topic.
And I guess we were all sort of growing up during the 80s. So I'd be really interested to hear, Liz, your experience of any sort of success stories, but also failures in terms of education supporting your needs as you were sort of going through that stage of learning and growing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I was born in 1979, and even especially at that time, you're still kind of in that almost like Victorian perspective of what disability is and how we should treat that. So much so that my parents' elderly neighbour asked them when were they going to put me in a home, for disabled. I just have this very Victorian image in my head of my parents shuffling me off to hide me away in some home for disabled people and all this stuff. So that was kind of the climate that my parents were really fighting against when I was born, and certainly that was reflective in the initial stages of my schooling. So the New South Wales Education Department wanted to send me to a special school in the neighbouring suburb, and my mum was having none of that. She as far as my mum was concerned, she was like, she has a physical disability, she doesn't have any specific learning needs, or she won't really need any specific learning support. So I want her to go to a mainstream school, and she really worked hard in the years leading up to me starting school with the local primary school. She'd take me up while she did canteen duty, and the teachers would get to know me, the head teacher got to know me, and in the end, when it came to fighting the New South Wales Education Department, she had the entire school behind her. They wanted me to come to the school. So the New South Wales Education Department allowed me a 3-month trial at the local primary school to see not only how I would cope, but also how the other students and the teachers would cope. And obviously, I passed that with flying colours, as did the school. They coped absolutely fine. The other kids, because, especially kids at that age, yes, they might be a bit curious, but they don't have those kind of deeply inbuilt prejudices yet. So I might have looked different to them, but I was still another kid to play with. And so I was readily accepted by my peers. And in general, I had a really, really positive schooling experience. There were the odd moments. So, one a story I tell quite often is in year 3, we had a craft teacher, and she decided one week that we were going to do weaving, and I remember distinctly her handing out weaving frames and yarn to all the other kids. And then in front of me, she plonked down a colouring in book and some pencils. And I come from a really crafty and arty family. And my mother's always encouraged me to do art and craft. So much so, I learned how to knit when I was 7. This is the kind of family I was raised in. So me in year 3, I'm sitting there gobsmacked going, but I want to do what all my friends are doing. Why can't I? But she had this, this particular teacher, she had this presumption in her mind that I wouldn't be able to do this activity. But, without even asking me if I wanted to at least try it. So it took me being really upset and going home every Tuesday afternoon after craft class, because I couldn't do what my friends were doing, for Mum to come up and have a word with the teacher and the head teacher. And what do you know, the week after, I had a loom and some yarn and I could actually weave. And woohoo!
It's like every woman's dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Get it on the Christmas list.
It was the best thing ever. And you know what? For me, I think, of course, there were other instances. Case in point, I wanted to join band one year. The most that they thought that I could play was the triangle for some reason, even though I'm like, hello, you need to have 2 hands to play a triangle. But case in point, now I'm learning how to play the piano, and I'm up to level 4. Like I'm playing a certain degree of difficulty. So I think with school and education, a lot of it is about busting through those assumptions and stereotypes and tropes and ideas and narratives around disability and what disabled children can do, and really just dismantling them and empowering actually teachers to feel confident about supporting a wide variety of disability within the classroom and the school.
And so much of that story is about your mum being such a sort of strong woman, not taking any of this on your behalf as well, and sort of fighting your corner when you're at an early age. And so Nick, that sort of brings me to you. What's your personal connection? And I know I was looking at your website yesterday and this morning, so you sort of sitting on the cornerstones of education and technology, but so I suppose you've got the tech side but also the personal side. I'd love to hear about.
Yeah, so my dad was actually a thalidomide baby, so he didn't have one of his hands, and I grew up with him, and it was completely normal. He'd hide his arm in the bed as a kind of a joke, stuff like that. And
brilliant.
Yeah, and that was our normal. Like, he was dad, and I never really thought about it until kind of went to school. And I remember someone in the playground sort of saying, "Oh, aren't you embarrassed?" And I was like, "Well, no. Why would I? I'm a bit embarrassed for you asking me that." And I think that kind of attitude in me that, this is not a problem. This is not, there's no problem. He was a welder by trade. So, wow. That's what, that's how he made a living. So I kind of came from that point growing up. And I think when I became a teacher, I remember things like people trying to, I had a new tech room, all the lovely iMacs and stuff in 2005 with a new Labour Academy. And they were trying to look at how someone in a wheelchair would come in. But lots of people who obviously had never been in a wheelchair came in to kind of map the room out. And I remember saying, well, why don't you ask someone to come in to check it out? Like, who is maybe in a wheelchair? And that was met with sort of lots of frowns and, "Oh, can we do that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course you can. Don't be mad." And then when I had my son, and my son's got needs, and we're on a very difficult lockdown pathway to help him get assessed. But so I've come from it as a parent, so I completely understand that parent having to battle with the education system of trying to make it bend to the needs of your child. And I think that's kind of where everything kind of comes in a sort of intersectional point of view with me, that my background is using technology, and obviously I'm working with the Edtech demonstrator program at the moment, but having that personal side, I know what an equalizer technology can be, so what everyone's now doing in schools, using a kind of mixed delivery, there's actually, there's all these tools hidden within with the tech people are using it. They're finding for the first time, like Immersive Reader and Microsoft, or looking at ways that can kind of engage. And I just think it's really interesting that in education at the moment we have got these very old-fashioned views still, I would say. Someone was saying about the olden days, which is like pre-COVID, which I quite like. In the olden times, there's been a bit more difficulty, I think, and particularly around teachers' lived experience around disability. And they don't necessarily understand what it's like and what potential there is. They would do, like you said, with the weave-in, Liz. They would do that because they would like, well, we don't want to embarrass, the student, and it all comes from a really good place, but it's wrong. It's the wrong place. It's not about having those conversations. So when we started to explore things for the GEC framework and what resources we could put in for school leaders, disability and anti-ableism was really important to me. And Liz at the time was working on her project where she's actually getting people who have this lived experience to share their stories. And I really like that with parents and teachers who don't get that experience, who actually don't really know anyone with a physical disability, who are really uncomfortable about talking about those kind of invisible disabilities, who don't know the right language, who are too scared to speak up. We kind of wanted to make it accessible, and so I've learned so much from Liz. And I think it's a hot point with where those two things come together, where technology is that kind of equalizer, but that training that education really needs to do around this as well to be fully inclusive.
And Liz, are those stories kind of hosted on a podcast?
I kind of get people's stories in so many different ways. So the project that Nick was just referring to, there's actually a document on my website called What is Disability? And I'm starting to work on the next document, which is educating around the issues that disabled people face on a daily basis. But I also do run a podcast as well, and also edit a online publication called Conscious Being, which is for disabled women by disabled women, and that's purely about giving a platform for disabled women to share their experiences, but think Marie Claire. So there's a little bit of beauty, a little bit of fashion, a little bit of culture, all that stuff mixed in as well, but through the lens of being a disabled woman, because I think it's so important that our voices are heard, because that's the way people will learn. If you continue to hide disability, then nothing's ever going to change. So it's about really bringing it into the spotlight now and saying, we're here, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to be believed, we want to be acknowledged, and we want to be included in society, in every aspect of society. So there's no more ignoring us anymore.
No, absolutely not. Well, on that note, I've got a story here. So it's someone I know who's a parent who shared this. So they were sort of telling me about trying to access sort of support for a learner with autism, say about 10 years ago. And 10 years later, they were sort of back in another room trying to get support for someone else with needs along the same lines. And in both situations, the people in the room that are supposedly responsible for triaging and helping with this support was sort of saying, I'm really sorry, that's basically it. Like, there's not much more we can do.
Yep.
And, her point was like, how is this allowed? How is this possible? And why is it acceptable, in the sense that, over a decade later, that conversation hadn't really moved on? And I was sort of wondering, from both of your perspectives, whether you think that's a sort of a funding thing, a tech thing, or just sort of joining the dots. Like, why?
You want to go first, Liz?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I actually think it's even. I think it's a lot of specific things behind it, because I'll be honest with you, nothing has, from what I've seen, and when I've spoken to other parents, when I've spoken to disabled students, nothing really has changed much since I was at school, which just astounds me. But I actually think a lot of it's cultural. I think if you you have to put kind of this this big umbrella over it and actually say there's so many aspects that we have to challenge, and it is because it's a cultural conditioning against disability. We're so used to not seeing it and not having to deal with it. And I think, the fact that it's actually, reasonable adjustment is a legal requirement by, it's in the law. Organizations, including education, that has to meet this legal requirement around accessibility and inclusion. Yet I think for a lot of people, it's still just this idea of, well, no, actually, I don't really have to do that. If it's going to cost too much, or it's going to be too hard, it's going to take too much time, it's too embarrassing. I don't want to upset the disabled people, or whatever that may be. And so I think it is definitely there has to be this wider cultural shift, and that then taps into everything: tech, education, representation, all of this. It's got to be all these shifts. I think for there to finally be just this really natural inclusion and accessibility in educational spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm like shaking. I think what is interesting, if you take the Equalities Act, which was 2010, and we are 10 years after it, not that much has happened. And I think for all the reasons that Liz has said, being a parent of a child who is currently trying to navigate a system in lockdown is incredibly hard. Lots of things have been frozen, but because of the sort of face-to-face surgeries that are needed and assessments. Also, the particularly, I would say, with lockdown as well, when it comes to autism, where some, the young people might be having sort of huge sensory meltdowns. There's a shift in the regular patterns. That's the whole idea of what's going on is a big grey area, and if you're thinking kind of binary black and white terms, it doesn't really help if you're firing off your neurons in the wrong way, and and that's led to increased. I know from the people I've talked to about self-harm and domestic violence at home with children that would normally find sort of a day-to-day quite traumatic, let alone what's going on now. And transitioning through different schools where they've not been able to go and look at them. All those kinds of things that have been going on at the moment have been very difficult. And I think what happens with things like autism, the lack of teacher training, the lack of lived experience, the lack of conversations around it. These can be very challenging students. They might be, exhibiting that behaviour at school or at home, so that there's that link up with parents, and it is difficult. And it sometimes feels like it is too difficult for some educational settings. They don't really know what to do. The specialist schools, obviously, a lot of them were closed down in the last decade as well. It depends on what your regional NHS pathways are like, et cetera. So there's a kind of like what I call the Kaplunk model. There's like all these different marbles and straws, isn't it just? So when it comes to these kinds of issues, and I think that happens a lot around any element when it comes to inclusion at the moment in education. The same could be said about sort of anti-racism, the same could be said about LGBT plus, the same could be said a lot of the time about social economic stuff, that it's just not quite there at the forefront when it comes to thinking about child development, about accessing curriculums. And I think when it comes to, that kind of the invisible or the neurodiverse, particularly around the autistic spectrum, it is hard for people to understand if they haven't had that training.
I know you mentioned before, we had obviously the COVID pandemic, and it's meant a lot of experiencing remote learning, and for some that has been a good thing, for others it's been more challenging. The sort of Ofsted reports that have been done across the year draw the conclusion that children with special educational needs and disabilities sort of suffered more in terms of their learning and support overall. I just wondered then, what is the kind of sort of challenge to EdTech then in order to say, okay, some of this was good, but what can we do better next time? And how can we bring the tools that, the technology is definitely there. We did a whole episode on this before. There's like lists and lists and reams and reams. So how do we connect the two, in a more impactful way, I suppose?
Well, I think the first thing, there will be a lot of families that also say that not having the students at school has been a blessing. A lot of children have actually engaged more with their learning at home, and I think if you look at the home schooling figures which have gone up, illustrate that as well. Although I know a lot of schools are very keen to get their SEND children into school, that is not the case for every single student. I think when it comes to EdTech, there's also a kind of understanding how that child might meet working with a screen. There might be challenges with them having a screen. I know my son doesn't like Zooms or any of those kinds of things. So that would be a barrier to learning. I think lockdown has proved lots of learning for staff. The way that a lot of work was put out in March, which was almost like sending work to a supply teacher, not a parent, that came out, is very different to the work that's happening now. And I know that with the Ofsted, initially that was a voluntary process by the schools. So, one would think that those schools would be happy to have Ofsted in if they were volunteering. When it's come to the government guidance around SEND and around early years has been lacking. Partly my frustration has been with that, because they are probably, the least independent sort of sectors of education that need more support. With the Edtech Demonstrator Programme, I feel really privileged in the Southwest to be working with Neil Bett and his team at National Star, which is a specialist FE college. And actually that has been picked up by the DFE, and they've just put some guidance around assistive technologies. And the work that we did with Neil, he and I were really keen that it wasn't SEND EdTech, it was accessible tech, because actually there's so much tech, as you say, out there, Soph, that really what we're looking at is how the technology makes you productive, no matter who you are, how you're coming to that, and how that can help increase your sort of disposition for learning, your skills and your knowledge, which is essentially what education is about. And I think that is the learning around COVID, that we've got all these lovely tools, we've got all these students, but how do we engage them, and how do we personalise it? And one thing that I think has been really lacking is the feedback that teachers give students. And that is extremely important when it comes to those students with SEND, that they are getting that personalised experience still when they're not in the classroom.
Thank you. So I suppose as we're recording this, we're coming into the Christmas season and New Year, which is always hopefully a point of optimism. So just wondered for both of you, I know that you're both extremely well connected, and obviously you met on Twitter. You'll have resources and tools and people that I know you'll be really passionate about how they can help our listeners if they're listening in, either from the educator side or in terms of developing technology in this space, or thinking about policy. So what are your kind of absolute go-to resources or people or projects that you always say to people, oh, you should definitely go off and check this out? Because that's what I'd love to leave people with as well if they're listening in.
For me, it might not necessarily be specifically tech, but there is one organisation that I've been doing some work with called We Can Access. They're fairly new off the ground, but they've got a website where they encourage disabled people and their families and carers and spouses and that to kind of be involved and talk about recommendations around not just travel but tech and all the stuff that kind of impacts disabled people's lives. And so I'd highly recommend kind of following them. I think as well it's important to say there's Disability Ed UK out there as well. Definitely give them a follow. They had their first annual conference last night, which was amazing, but I felt like we really need more people engaging with that, because that's how you learn, is by following people with that lived experience and who have that protected characteristic. And, I just follow as many, on social media, as many disabled influencers and creatives and educators and that as you possibly can. And there's so many out there, I wouldn't even know where to start, who to mention that I tend to follow, but definitely check out I Think We Can Access would be a great starting point.
Okay, that's excellent, thank you.
I think I would say I'd come to the Edtech Demonstrator Programme. Have a look at the website. We are running till March 2021. If you're a school and college in England, you get free support up to 6 weeks intensive support. If you want to develop your work around any area or SEND or any maybe hard to reach families, please get in contact with us, and the regional leads can set you up with a demonstrator in your area to help with this. We've also got a huge range of materials, webinars that we've recorded over the last, since March. They're all on the site, they're all free, and we have got a special SEND area. There's also the Accessible Tech Thursdays, which Neil is running with National Star. That's at 4:15. You can find those informations on our website. Again, they're free, they're all pre-recorded, and they're going through till March on every area from kind of mainstream. There's seminar webinars for parents, but also for more specialist SEND around therapists. That would be something else. I would also say at the GEC, we are doing a lot of work to try and help people understand around all the different areas of diversity and inclusion, which obviously includes disability and anti-ableism. If you want to know who to follow, maybe have a look at our collective. We've got links on the website of people that really want to help you. And we've just launched our framework and mark called the GEC app. And that is for schools and colleges. You can do an assessment with your staff to work out what their thoughts are around your practice and policy when it comes to all 9 characteristics of the Equality Act, including disability and socioeconomic status. And then there's all the e-learning hub with brilliant resources to help you, including those from Liz as well. And then the last thing I would say, if you are, if you've got a website, or you've got some tech out there, check out what devices you can use to make your tech more accessible. Usability is a great widget that you can plug into your existing platforms and websites, but just make sure that everyone can kind of access your stuff too.
Nick mentions usability here, but we had a quick catch up and she remembered that the widget you're after is actually called Userway. Not only that, but she very kindly took the opportunity to reel off a whole load more recommendations for accessible design. So do check out also Equal Web, Avtech, Max Access and Accessibe whilst you're at it. And all links for that are in our show notes.
You can get doing something about it, about being more inclusive.
That's absolutely amazing. It's been brilliant speaking to you both. I feel like I've had the sort of cerebral equivalent of about 5 espressos. So I'm absolutely loving that. And yeah, now I'm pumped and ready to start my day. So thank you both so much.
Thanks, Soph. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Sophie.
That's all for this week. Thank you so much to Nick and Liz for being amazing guests, and Liz, especially a big thank you for being the first para-Olympian on our podcast. That's very exciting. And I do challenge everyone listening to go and do one thing as a result of listening to their experiences. So for me, I'm going to go and check out Assistive Tech Thursdays a bit more and listen in and learn from that online community. Thanks again to Bett for supporting this series and FormAssembly for supporting this episode. To find out what they're up to and for all the show notes, including resource and reading recommendations from our guests, it's theedtechpodcast.com. And as always, we love to hear from you. If you don't want to leave us a voicemail, you can tweet using the hashtag EdTechPod and Bett2021. That's all for now. Have a great week. Bye-bye.